Tuesday. I'm going to do it again tomorrow. And we're back. MAPD714. That's in the fall 2017 semester. We are at Centennial, and we're talking about iOS development. We are week 2, part 3 of our broadcast. We're still talking about basic user interactions, and we just put our label and button in place, but I need to somehow connect them. And let's see if we can get that done without looking at the PowerPoint and finishing off with a little bit more time to spare. So I'm back into Xcode. I'm looking at my storyboard. I can see that I have my apps, they're kind of set up okay. I want to just, get rid of this part here. And if I want to get rid of the outline, I don't need the outline, I want to make more space for myself, I can just click this little other button down here so I can give myself as much room with the storyboard as I like so you can see what I'm doing here. Okay, so I've got these 3 buttons. I'm just making them big so I get a view here. And on the right, I want to use this as a way of connecting to my code. Now, I don't want to just do this all the time. I don't want to go here and then here. I want to have my storyboard here, and over here, I want my view controller Swift. By default, there's a thing called the assistant. If I click the assistant editor, right, this is the assistant editor. I can get rid of the one on the right, and then I have this little assistant editor that comes up that's paired to the storyboard. So now the storyboard, because my storyboard, and later on we'll talk about it, how you can set up which if you make a new storyboard, how it links to another view controller file, right? For now, it's linked. This main storyboard is linked to my view controller.swift file, right? And so that way, when I click the editor, the assistant editor, it's side-by-side view of what this looks like. Now, I don't need this anymore for now, so let's just get rid of it so you can see more. I'm just giving you some more space. What I want to do here is I want to make connections for my label and both of my buttons. Okay, there's different kinds of connections you can do. Here are the connection types, and I want you to help me, all right? Let's look intuitively what this sounds like. I want to make an outlet, and I want to make an action. What kind of connection do I have to make for my label? An outlet or an action? Why an outlet? Action sounds like I need to do something. Am I ever going to do anything with my label, like click on it? If the answer is no, I don't need an action. Actions are only if I'm going to interact with a control, okay? Outlets, what they do is they create a reference from my user interface to my code. That's what they are. They're a reference, like a reference in memory. If I can think about my user interface, my touchscreen, as a place in memory for everything that I have on my touchscreen, then an outlet is that reference. Let's do that. So how do I do this? First of all, it has to become, this is a class. And if you understand object-oriented programming, by the way, please put up your hand if you have very little object-oriented programming practice, so you can remind me, you guys need to do that course on lynda.com for iOS. You need help. I'll go back. Because if you don't know, I'm sorry to say lynda.com, you need a little bit of work on object-oriented programming, because if you don't know this, you're in trouble. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I need to put it inside my class container. This is my class called view controller, and it inherits from UI view controller, right? Like we talked about. Well, right in here, let's make some space here. I want to make a connection. I want to put it up here, and the way to do that is, notice if I have control, if I have the control button, I hold the control button down, I have this little line that comes up here, right? And what I can do is if I go to my editor, notice that it can put inside my class, anywhere in my class, I can target this kind of connection, okay? If I let go, it gives me 2 types of connections. One is an outlet or an outlet collection. It doesn't allow me by default to set up an action because a label is not actionable. So therefore, it's an outlet. An outlet collection is if I had multiple labels that I want to connect with one array or some other kind of collection. For example, a list of labels, a list of rows. Then I would use an outlet collection, because a collection is a collection of components or objects that are similar, and that's what this thing allows me to do. Let me fix it. multiple objects. I like your thinking. All right, so I don't need an outlet collection. All I need is an outlet. So let's just leave the default outlet selected. Now I need a name for the outlet, and usually it's something to do with what I'm doing, right? So let's just call this the output label. Okay, I'm going to lowercase o because I'm going to use camel case label, right? And I press, and notice that there's different kinds. Look at how it figured out that it's a UI label. However, I can also choose something else if it wasn't this. And then the storage type, we'll figure out what storage is, weak and strong. Okay, let's leave it at weak. We'll talk about that later. When I click connect, it creates something funny, right? It has something called an IB outlet. What does IB stand for? Come on. We talked about this last week. We said that last week, thank you. Remember that Xcode was not made from scratch, right? It had two different kinds of applications that ran side by side. One of them was Xcode at the time, and the other one separate was Interface Builder. And we used to build interfaces in Interface Builder and incorporate the output of the Interface Builder into Xcode. Now, over the last several years, Xcode and Interface Builder have become one. But the remnants, the leftovers of what it used to be, is this IB outlet, Interface Builder Outlet. That's what it stands for. It's a weak connection. We'll talk about weak and strong in a second. It's memory we're talking about here when I say weak. Var, I'm declaring a variable that's of type UI label. Colon means of type UI label. So I'm explicitly telling the compiler that the output label variable is of type UI label, which means I'm actually declaring that this label is a reference to a UI label object that's on the user interface. Notice I'm not using the new keyword like we do in other languages. And in fact, even in other languages, I wouldn't need to here because I'm saying that the output label is going to receive a reference from the user interface, and we already have an object on the user interface called UI label. So the reference, this UI label, is going to point a pointer to the memory location of the label on my user interface. That's all it's going to be. Once I made this, now the way we connect it is you can see that there's this little button here on the gutter. Here's the gutter. And on this little button here shows me which one it's connected to. See? Right? Also, if I click on here and I bring back the attribute inspector, notice that in the connections, I have this connection that's showing right here. Do you see this? Right? So I'm clicked on the label. I've brought up my attribute inspector here, right? And I'm not looking at this. I'm looking at the connections inspector. And notice these are the referencing outlets. I can see that my output label is pointing to my view controller, and that's my connection, right? It's showing you the connection. I can delete it if I click this little X here, like this. And now my thing, it looks like it's not a filled in circle anymore. It's an empty circle. The connection no longer exists. There is no reference anymore. And for me to refresh the connection, right? Let's see if I can do it like this. Can I do it like this anymore? Look, if I pick the outlet like this, see when it highlights the whole thing like this, look. Now, I actually, if I let go, it puts the connection back. You need to know how to do this because we're going to make mistakes. Connection to the outlet, you're going to say, I don't understand. Check the connections. Make sure that all the connections are referencing to an object that's inside the code, or else something may not work the way you think it's going to work. Okay, so we got an outlet. Yay. Okay. Let's make an action. I'm just going to get rid of the inspector. Let's make an action. Well, I want to put this action underneath the view did load method. And by the way, just to get rid of some of this, just to make it easier for us, I'm just going to get rid of some of the comments to make it very small. And I'm going to take the left button, control, drag the left button, and notice that now I can put the action or outlet anywhere in here. Let's put an action in here this time. Notice now I have two options, or three. I have an outlet, an action, or an outlet collection. Let's make it an action, because now I'm creating an action type. So what Xcode is going to do is going to populate a bit of code for me to create the event handler. That's what it really is, the event handler for this event. All right. Now here's the event, touch up inside. It's not sexual. It does not mean I'm going to touch you up inside. Okay. That's not what it means. I'm sorry. But when people see this the first time, and I don't mean this in a bad way, please forgive me. It's weird. You're like, what the heck? What's touch up inside means? It means when I have a button and I'm touching on the inside of the button, that's what this means. There's different kinds of touches and gestures you can do because this is a touchable interface, right? So take a look at this. Touch up inside, there's different kinds of gestures you can do. For example, touch down, or drag, touch, drag, enter, touch, drag, exit. When I stop dragging something. And I can do different kinds of events. I can listen to different kinds of events. What we want is touch up inside. How about touch up outside? That's on the outside of the button. Sometimes we want to detect that happening as well, but not as often. So touch up inside is the right one. Next, we need to name the event. All right, we want to hit both events. So we're going to call this, lots of stuff here, button action. All right, lowercase button action. Now, by the way, in the PowerPoint, something else. Don't worry about that. Now, take a look at this, sender. I can also have sender and event, or I can have none. What this is doing right here, the arguments option, is it's starting to configure my method. What is my method going to look like? What kind of arguments do I want in my final method? What do I mean by that? Let's click connect. This. Okay, I want to break the connection. I want to break the connection. I'm going to go here, right? I'm going to go to my connections. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to break it. Break. No more connection, right? I did it on purpose because I want to get rid of this whole thing too. Whoa. Let's try it again. So I want to control drag in here, right? I know that I want to call this the action, right? I know that this is going to be an action, not a outlet, but take a look at the type. The type is any. That's not good. I should make it UI button. That's what I forgot to do. That's why I made it again, right? And now, after I've done this, I can connect. And now you can see that it's just configured. I'll bring this a little further here like this. You can see it's just configured the Swift code, right, to declare my method. Okay, Swift 101. Remember, we've learned a couple things about Swift today. And this is how we're going to learn it. We're learning it piecemeal, just-in-time Swift. Okay, I'm sorry to say it that way. All right, but I've got an IB action. So IB stands for interface builder. I have the keyword function. That's where it comes from, right? And then the name of the function, an underscore. I'll explain that later. And then sender, colon, with UI button. So what this is saying is, right, that I'm retrieving a UI button argument, right, a sender object of type UI button, the button that's being clicked. Right. The sender object, by the way, not just here in Apple, but also in Windows and probably in Android. The sender object refers to the button that was clicked. So if I have multiple buttons, the sender object is going to refer to the button that was clicked. All right? It's a reference to that button. So if I have only one button connected to it, like I do right now, the left button, if I click the left button, it's a reference to the left button. However, if I have both buttons connected to it, let's connect the other button together with this one. So I'm getting my right button. instead of me creating a new action, which is not efficient, we talked about that for the calculator, right? It's not efficient for us to create another event handler for every button. We're going to use the same one here, right? I'm going to drag, control drag, and this time I'm going to target the existing, look how it highlights. It has to be highlighted like this, right? The existing button. So now I have both this one and this one are both targeting the same action, the same event handler. Why? Because it doesn't make sense. They're just both, they're a left button and right button. Why would I make two different event handlers for the same one? I'd rather detect which one I was clicking and deal with that one based on which one I clicked. Two ways to address this. One, I can say if the sender is equal to this, then blah, 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 right? Or, and then else, if the sender is equal to right, then do blah, blah, blah. But that's really inefficient because we know a couple things, right? Left and right buttons have also text values, left and right. So we don't have to check for which one, but rather which text value it is, left or right. The sender is actually something that has a, is already have a shape. Remember we talked, for people who don't understand what I'm talking about with object-oriented programming, when I have an object, objects have something called a shape. Shape is made up of the constructor and any methods and any other signatures, any other properties that it has built into it. UI button is a big object because it inherits from control or view, right? So if you look at if I want to see what this is, and I believe if I hover over it with the option key, take a look, I'm pressing the option key, my cursor turns into a plus, a crosshairs. And if I hover over this one and press left click, I'm going to get some information about this UI button class. And you can see that it inherits from the UI control and implements the NS coding interface. We'll talk about interfaces later for those people who've never taken object-oriented programming. You cannot inherit from two classes in Apple, just like you can't do it in other languages. There is no multiple inheritance, but we can use interfaces, and the NS coding is an interface. And if I scroll down here, you can see that there is information about what this does. If I click on UI control, keep going, you can see that the UI control will come up with some documentation, right? And it explains details in Swift about different parts of the language. And this is some really great documentation, to be honest with you. Much more detailed in many ways than other languages have, right? So here's my UI button. You can see what the UI button is. Swift, not Objective-C. There's two different ports to this language, right? Here's my button, what they look like, right? It also gives you some examples of code, right? Different button states, content, everything. This is for your leisure reading in the bathroom somewhere, all right? Or when you need it. How about that one? All right, so we've got the button, but we got nothing inside of it. Let's check to see if both buttons are connected to it, to this little action. Bring back the action, right? I'm going to click on the button, and if you look at this action, it says touch up inside. That's good. How about my other one? If I click on this button, yeah, well, do I have this one connected? Yeah, it's connected to the same thing, right? The other quick way of knowing if they're connected or not is, let's just hide this one. If I hover over this, see how they both light up, right? They're both lighting up now, right? Look, that means this event is tied to both of those buttons. This event is only tied to this button or this label. This is a IB outlet. This is an IB action, two different kinds of code. Are we clear? Reference. This is a reference to the label object. Notice there's some other funky coding. I have this exclamation mark. Remember I said there's no semicolon, but we have an exclamation mark in Swift, and it means explicitly unwrap. It's an ugly thing, right? You don't even know what unwrapping means. In Swift, you cannot have an object that's uninitialized. It's not allowed because Swift is a type-safe language. So when we have something that's uninitialized, we have to do something called explicitly unwrapping. we're kind of initializing it with the exclamation mark, kind of. We'll talk about that. Sorry? Could, but you don't want to do that because once you initialize it with null, then something might happen weird with the reference. The reference is happening, it's coming, it is being initialized actually, because it's getting a reference from the label object that's on our UI, right? But Swift doesn't know that. If I've written this like this by itself without this connection, whether it's going to get a connection or not. And because it doesn't know for sure, right? We need to explicitly tell it that we're going to get something. It's almost exactly the same, yeah. But you have to, the initialization happens with the exclamation mark because we're telling it, don't worry, we're getting a value. That's what we're saying to it. You can also use a question mark. And we're going to see question marks and exclamation marks a lot. So if I use a question mark, it means one thing. And a question and an exclamation mark means another thing. Please hang in there. I will explain what they mean. Just accept them for now, all right? Because we have to move on. All right. Now, once I've got this stuff, I want to do something with the label. For now, let's do something with the label. I want to access the label. And as a first step, let's look at the output label. Notice that it's getting me code hinting, right? And I want to type output label dot. I can use the dot accessor method to, I want to access the text value, right? Notice when I start typing, it's, you know, Xcode is pretty intuitive here. And it's saying, okay, what are we getting? Text is actually a type string, right? So I want to say my text value, I can double click there as well, is equal to, you know, something like some button was clicked. It's really long, right? Woo! That's going to mess up my label, right? I don't know which button yet. We want to detect the button that's clicked next, but some button, we don't know which button, some button is being clicked. Let's run this thing and see what happens. So I'm going to run this thing, and we'll bring up the simulator and see what happens, and see if my code crashes, you know, or something like that. Do I see my buttons? Okay, yes, I see my buttons. My application did become active. Some button was clicked. Okay, what about this one? Well, even though it triggers, we can't tell because we're not making another message. Right? Let's stop it and try again. Stop. Try again. And we'll pick the right button this time. Right? Just to know that the event handler is working for both buttons. Right? So you can see that no matter which button we pick, it detects an event. Something is triggering that label. And the reason why is because we're sharing the event handler. It's a shared event handler, right, that we're using. Or shared action is what it's called in Swift, the Swift terminology, right? Shared action. Between these two views, these button views, right, is using this action. You can see that they're connected so that no matter which one is pressed, it's going to change the label name. All right, now we want to know that the left or the right was clicked, depending on which one was clicked. We know the sender has some kind of value. And if I start playing with the sender object like this, sender dot, right? And now there's a bunch of things I can look to for the sender object. Notice that there's an image view, right? But there's also something called a title, right? There's a title for UI control state. There's the title label. Well, let's see if I can get the title label, what that means, right? So it's my sender. I want to print out, let's see if I can do that. Print the sender dot title label, right? Title label. Let's try that. What does that do? So I want to print the sender, whatever the sender is. And by the way, look, I'm getting an error, right? Don't despair. Look at this little button here. It's going to give you some suggestions. It's going to say, fix it. Provide a default value to avoid this one. Remember I talked about default values? This must have a default value, right? Expression implicitly coerced from UI label question mark to any. Force unwrap the value to avoid this warning. Or explicitly cast to any with as any. I don't want to silence. I want to do this one, the second one. Remember I talked about wrapping and unwrapping? Double click, which means exclamation mark. I'm putting it in there. I'm showing it to you because you may get a warning or an error, and all it means is, hey, I don't have a I can't guarantee that I'm going to get a value, right? So because I can't guarantee that I'm going to get a value because I'm getting an argument passed to me by some source that I can't verify, please explicitly unwrap me and make sure, tell me that I'm going to be okay. That's what it's asking. Please tell me I'm going to be okay. Am I going to be okay? And that's what it's basically saying. If you think it's going to be okay, explicitly unwrap. Still may crash, by the way. There's no value. Finally, it's going to crash, right? All right, let's try this out. So, blah, blah, blah. We're going to go up here. We're going to run it. It's going to bring up the first part of my debugging. When it comes up, application did become active. Yay. I click on my left. This funky message that says UI button label 0x7f, blah, 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 blah. And the text is left. Woohoo! Guess what? We detected which one. Let's try the right. Right. So if my text is left or if my text is right, that's what I want. I want this text left or right from the label. Okay, that's neat. That's good. That's good. Notice how important the debug window is. It gives me details about what's happening. And I'm going to be referring to this debug window throughout our time together in this course and the next course. Okay? So please, it's really important. Okay, so we know this, the sender does that. That's the title label. Is there a way of inferring other things? Like we know that the title label.text then refer to, let's implicitly unwrap it to prevent problems. Could this be something that's available? And no, we know automatically that the pre-compiler tells us something's wrong. Notice it says that value of optional type UI label not unwrapped. Did you mean to use exclamation mark? Well, I kind of did that. But what it's saying is put something there before this, like this. You can put a question mark in there and an exclamation mark, and this is not right. It's going to ask me to redo it again. Fix it, provide a default value to avoid this warning or force unwrap. This is what I really look at. A double exclamation mark. Woohoo! Right? That doesn't make any sense. And it's going to keep on complaining because it just doesn't understand what I'm trying to do here, right? For something like this, I do this. Does it give me an error? It does. Where it asks me to unwrap, force unwrap, where I'm going to do one of these, where both of them are unwrapped. Now, it doesn't give me an error. This doesn't mean that my program won't crash. I'm actually trying to crash it for you so you can see what I'm talking about. Let's try it out. So, try it out, right? Let's see if it's going to come up. Let's see what the warnings I get. All right, cool. Application did become active. We're good. And I'm going to click the right side. Woohoo! Right. How did I get that? And by the way, I'm just going here. I'm not even planning to this stuff. I mean, I read the PowerPoint. But at the end of the day, if you look at this stuff, what's happening is the title label itself gives me a hint that the text object is available because the sender refers to some kind of button. Because I'm telling it that it has the shape of a button. However, I want to get the text value because I don't want to just say some button was clicked. I want to say that the text value, right, was clicked. In other words, I want to say that this thing was clicked. I want to take this part right here, sender the title, that text. I want to cut it out of here. I don't need that anymore. Oops. I want to try that again. Take this whole thing, and I'm going to put it over here, and I'm going to add a plus to it and see if this is good. Because in other languages, when we add a plus, what do? Concatenate from one type of string to another. Will it work here in Swift? Drum roll, please. Let's see if it works. If we're totally out of whack, right? If it doesn't work for us. Didn't stop me. It would have given me a warning if there was some other kind of weird thing going on, right? Brought this up. Application did become active. And if I click left, ba-boom, left button was clicked. Ba-boom, right button was clicked. Ba-boom, left button was clicked. And we're using the same exact action method. Some part of this was done differently in the PowerPoint. And I encourage you to try and put this together on your own again, by yourself. Go through the PowerPoint. when you have time, or at least read it, see what's done differently there. I've covered the meat and bones of what's in that PowerPoint presentation, right? Right? But I'd like you to go through it again to understand what I've done here, all right? There's not a lot of rocket science involved, okay, truly. All I'm doing is playing with event handling just like we do in other languages and platforms. This should be nothing new for you at this point. If it is new, you need to do some homework. You need to do a little bit of pre-work when you come into this class about some kind of object-oriented programming language, which I recommend. Again, lynda.com, this plural site. You can do some reading about object-oriented programming just on the web by looking it up. What is it? How does it work? But you need some fundamentals about it, right? You need to understand about basic events and an event-based system. By the way, Node.js is purely event-driven. So if you're going to be doing Node.js with our friend Victor, you're going to be dealing with events all the time, right? Different kinds of events, not just button-click events, but actually file change events, connection events, other kinds of events that happen with Node.js, because that's how microservices work. It's an event-driven system, right? This is very easy code, but if I look at the PowerPoint presentation for a second, I've got an alternate solution. Notice that if I scroll down, I do the same thing here with IB actions, right? That's what I explained, what IB actions in here, what they do, right? And it gives you the idea of what the UI controllers, if you actually read this, and the buttons need to trigger actions. That's what we just talked about, just as a refresher. And how to get the buttons going, how to connect the left side and the right side, what the assistant editor looks like, which we opened up. So you can see that code next to the storyboard. We talked about that a little bit as a recap. Scroll, keep going down. Somewhere down here, I'm just going to find the exact place for you to go to, which is way down in here. You see how fast I went, right? Because I knew we weren't going to be able to get through 80 slides. Here, this is the first one we did. Look, we had now they called it status label and button pressed for the action. By the way, they also got rid of which action? They also got rid of they don't need that event handler. They took it out completely out of the code. Look, there's no view did load. I left it in. It's good to leave in because we're going to use it, right? And it talks about things like automatic reference counting. In C and C++, what happens is memory management is very manual. But here in Swift, as well as in other higher level languages like C# and Java, automatic reference counting and memory management becomes easier, right? And that's what this does. So you don't have to do an alloc and malloc or dealloc. All right, so so they talked about writing the actual action method, and down in here, you can see that they do something slightly different. Look, let the title, they actually use the let keyword instead of var, right? Let in Swift refers to a constant. That's a little different than in other languages. You don't use the const keyword, use let. In ES6 JavaScript, let does not mean a constant. Let means don't let it hoist. That's what it means. Because JavaScript hoists everything to the top when it programs. Not so here. So it's not like JavaScript. It looks like it. It's the keyword the same, but it's not the same, the same outcome. Here, what we've done is do the following: sender.title for selected. This is different, right? I did it slightly different than this. And notice also, instead of doing concatenation, this is the way we do interpolation, right, with Swift. So here in the PowerPoint presentation, it's doing interpolation by the backslash and then the name of the variable inject into the text, into the string. Okay, that's what interpolation is. So that's an alternate thing that you could have done. That's why I did it differently. So you can see both methods. Okay. Also, I couldn't remember, right? Status label.text equal to text. I'm just getting the text string and I'm assigning it here. And notice here, when I do this kind of thing, when I say that let the title is equal to the sender.title for the selected state, whatever the selected object is, and then I explicitly unwrap it because I don't know if I'm going to get anything, right? When I do the sender, remember I explicitly, but I'm only explicitly unwrapping once, where in my solution, I'm explicitly unwrapping twice. because I don't know if I'm going to get either one, right? Okay, so that's this part. It also does some changes later on when we do testing. They add in here some fixes with auto layout. We talked about a little bit of auto layout here. Please take a look at some of this stuff, at least read through the PowerPoint presentation, just to take a look at this. If you don't see this enough times, you won't understand it, or you won't remember it. I'm just going to kind of go down here and see if I can see some more code for you. This is still fixing issues with auto layout. Okay, previewing the layout allows you to do different layouts. This is a hint of how to do different layouts and how to use different layout classes to arrange stuff. Changing the text style. This is interesting. They want to change the text style programmatically in the PowerPoint. And in the book that I'm using, it uses something called an NS attributed string. What does NS stand for? I talked about this really briefly. Next step, it comes from Steve Jobs' old company, right? That is now discontinued and has been absorbed by Apple, the big crazy company that it is, right? Remember one time Steve Jobs got fired, right, from Apple because he got ousted. That's the story. And when he got fired, he went off and created another company called Next Step, right? And then later on, that company was bought out by Apple, and then he became the CEO again, right? So it's kind of an interesting, thing. And if you actually listen to to Steve Jobs, there's a great speech he does for a commencement speech. Look it up, Steve Jobs commencement speech, right? It's a great thing to listen to. What he talks about. He talks about, stay hungry, stay foolish. But those kind of words are iconic in my mind because he talks about how he had this big journey to get there. And part of it was creating something called Next Step. And that's where this Next Step attribute string comes from. In fact, this Next Step attribute string comes from the Foundation library, not UIKit. UIKit is what we're using for iOS. But NS attribute string, it comes from Foundation. Cocoa Touch, a Cocoa Touch class. Okay? What the heck is Cocoa Touch? Remember, iOS has evolved, right? It didn't come from nowhere. It came from something else. There was something called Cocoa, right? Like as in coffee bean cocoa, right? And Cocoa refers to Mac OS. So there's Cocoa classes, Mac classes. If I'm programming for the Mac, Touch was the old iOS. That's the foundational classes we used to use, or the legacy classes that were used to be used, and they were all written in Objective-C. So this, my friends, NS, whenever you see NS in front of anything, it's Objective-C. I'm using an Objective-C class that's been transferred into Swift, still staying in the state. And this is like this because of backwards compatibility, right? We're using legacy classes without changing anything. Eventually, the NS classes, I hope, are going to disappear, and we're not going to use. We're not going to need to use them because we'll have our new Swift classes. For now, they're here to stay. So NS attribute string need to use to programmatically change the attribute of the string that is inside the label. All right, and that's what they do here programmatically. Here's the code, right? So notice we say the style text is of type NS, Next Step, Objective-C, NS mutable attribute string. That is the type, right? And it's of type string, right? That's what it is. So we're defining what this style text is, right? And then what we're saying is let the attributes be a dictionary of type NS font attribute name. And then we're saying take the system font, UI font, bold it, right, of size, the same size as that currently exists in the label. So whatever that label is, status label.font.point size, we're taking the existing font size from the label and applying the same point size to the new text attribute that we're creating here. Guys, the reason why I didn't go through this is because I'm talking Greek to you now, right? For most of you. Some people will go, what? You can keep talking, Tom, but I just, right? And so that's why I didn't do it this way. But however, I'd like you to explore this because this is a good preview when we get into doing things like any kind of advanced processing with iOS, we need to access those foundational classes. Don't be afraid of them. They're well documented. We use Objective-C. So could you, if you had more time, what would you learn? Do some Objective-C as well, right? And you're going to say, you're crazy, man. You're crazy. How many languages do I need to know? I need to know Java. I need to know Objective-C. I need to know Swift. I need to know a little bit of object-oriented programming. I need to know iOS. I need to know, iOS, the application lifecycle iOS. I probably should do a little bit of Mac OS. Probably should do a little bit of Xcode. Are you going to throw at me? And this is why, like I said before, I'm trying to prove to you, hopefully I've proved to you by now, that iOS programming, when you become an iOS mobile developer, the reason why you get paid a lot of money is because there's a lot to know. So someone asked you, your brother, sisters, cousins, uncle in the future asked you to say, hey, can you make me an app? Say, sure, I can make you an app for $80,000, right? Because it's a really hard thing to do. Don't think it's going to be easy. And this is why also hybrid systems have come out. These hybrid, ways of doing things where you use web apps to create both iOS and Android applications. That's why we do them. Hey, welcome back. We use iOS, we use hybrid apps to do that. We use a Xamarin Studio to do apps because we use Unity to make apps for iOS, right? The Unity app, the Unity system, because we want to make user interfaces or games with Unity because it's way easier sometimes than knowing this plus Android plus web. It's like that whole idea of deploy everywhere, right? With one code base. Sometimes there's some logic to that, but you do sacrifice performance a lot of times too. And you don't have access to some of the device-specific modules or drivers inside the device. You don't have access to the actual device components. Okay, so take a look at this. We did that programmatically, and if you keep going down, you can see that there's other things in here. This is also something else, name range. Notice that I'm also using something called NS string, a type of next step string, because the name range, I want to make it this text value. I'm casting it here as of type NS string, and I'm basically saying between this range of the actual title itself. So it's messed, guys, the way we're doing things here, and that's why I prefer to use Swift, but we have no choice but to use some of these legacy Objective-C classes. Okay, that's really it in a nutshell. I'm not going to go too much here. It also talks about the app delegate, and the last two files show you what the app delegate looks like, which is a default that's part of every iOS template that we use in our projects in Xcode. Okay, so that's really it in a nutshell. Any questions around this? There should be lots of questions. I'm putting myself out there because I know there should be lots of questions, right? If there's not a lot of questions, can I press both buttons? It is. Some one button is going to return the event first, right? Depending on which one you press first, you might try and press both. Only one's going to respond. Maybe none of them, right? So we have to try that out. That's definitely a very good question. How do I do multi-touch? Does anyone know how to do multi-touch? In this simulator, right? I can also try and emulate multi-touch, right? And if I run it, you can actually use it by a series of key presses when I'm running this application, right? So I want to do multi-touch. Usually works better with an iPad interface, right? But if you notice, I'm going to try and press both this one and this one. If I press my Option key, notice I have these two fingers, and I can go right over here like this and press them at the same time. See, it's kind of hard to simulate because that's why, in this particular case, it's better to deploy to a device. Then you know what the actual answer is going to be, right? I don't have my connection to do this, but next week, and I was hoping to do it this week, I was going to connect my device so you can see what it actually does on my device. But I can't do this because we've run out of time. Please forgive me. but I wanted to go into some details about GitHub today because it's part of what's going to happen for the rest of the semester. All right, let's stop this right now, and we'll stop recording, and I'm going to say a few last words to people in the room, which I'm not going to record. All right, so see you next week.